The night had settled over the castle, but it was unlike any other. A heavy, oppressive silence draped itself over the ancient stone walls, as if the darkness itself was alive and watching. The torches flickered uneasily in the wind, casting long, wavering shadows that danced like restless spirits. The guards on the walls mused in silence, their eyes scanning the tree line with a growing sense of unease. They stared at the edge of the forest, as if an army of 1,000 men was about to emerge from the gloom at any moment. The war had ended a good 5 years ago, yet the memories of those brutal days still haunted them. The images of blood-soaked fields and the cries of the dying were etched deep into their minds, impossible to forget. The peace that followed felt fragile, like a thin sheet of ice over a dark, unfathomable lake. But tonight, it wasn't just the memories that troubled them. There was something different in the air, something that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. The forest, usually so quiet at this hour, seemed to be holding its breath. Even the wind, which usually howled through the trees, was eerily still, as if nature itself was anticipating something dreadful. One of the guards, a veteran with a grizzled beard and eyes that had seen too much, tightened his grip on his spear.
Do you feel that?
He muttered to the man beside him, his voice barely above a whisper. The younger guard nodded, his face pale. It's as if something's coming. Something, the veteran agreed, his eyes narrowing as he peered into the darkness. But not an army. This feels different. They stood there, tense and silent, as the night pressed in around them. The fatigue of years past weighed heavily on their shoulders, but it was the unknown that now gnawed at their nerves. The castle had withstood countless sieges and battles, but could it withstand what was coming? The question hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. And then, just at the edge of hearing, there came a sound, a soft rustle, like the whisper of a secret too terrible to be told. The guards froze, every muscle tensed as their eyes strained to penetrate the darkness. The night had beaten the castle before, but this time it felt as though the night itself was about to strike. Deus, once the pinnacle of war technology, now moved slowly down the long corridor in front of the king's throne room, sweeping as he went. His once shining metal body was now a patchwork of rust and hastily applied repair plates, a stark reminder of past battles. Once, he had been the castle's greatest protector, a fearsome war machine on the front lines. But those days were gone. Now, he was relegated to menial tasks, sweeping the halls, tending to the children and assisting in the kitchen. Surprisingly, he had become quite adept at these simple duties, a far cry from the battlefield. "Deus, please finish sweeping and report to the main square," one of the paladins called out firmly as he passed by. The knight's tone was brisk, yet there was an undercurrent of urgency that caught Deus's attention. "The guards are complaining that they see lights deep in the forest and they want some support." Deus straightened slightly, a faint whirring sound emanating from his joints as he did so. He saluted with the precision of old times, his rusted arm clicking into place. "Yes, Captain," he responded, his voice echoing with the mechanical resonance of a time when his words carried the weight of command. As he turned to return the broom to its corner, his steps were deliberate, almost too calm. The memories of his former life as a warrior felt distant, like an old forgotten program that hadn't run in years. But then, a sudden shout pierced the air. "Deus, on the stand!" The command was like a bolt of electricity through his circuits. The ancient war machine froze, his sensors flaring to life. Deep within him, systems that had lain dormant for years surged back online. The contacts in his warforged head sparked beneath the rusted metal plates, as if struggling to remember their old functions. His hands, once steady as stone, began to tremble. His vision sharpened, every detail of the corridor coming into stark clarity. A strange sensation coursed through his circuits, something he had never experienced in all his years of combat. It was unfamiliar, a jarring dissonance in his usually precise operation. Could this be the fear that the humans spoke of? A creeping unease that gnawed at his logic processors, urging him to retreat, to reassess. No, Deus thought, his internal systems whirring in confusion. It must be a malfunction, a glitch in the programming. I'll report to the mechanic as soon as we fix this issue with the lights. But deep down, as he marched towards the main square, there was a part of him, a small, almost imperceptible fragment of his consciousness, that wondered if this malfunction was something more. Something that couldn't be repaired or recalibrated. Something that spoke of a war machine past its prime, confronting an enemy it could neither see nor understand. Deus stepped into the courtyard, his metal frame moving with mechanical precision, yet his mind was clouded with unease. The scene before him was a chaotic symphony of tension and urgency. A small group of escorts was hastily preparing to march out, their faces tight with fear and determination. On the castle walls, guards were in a frenzy, some clutching their heads in panic, others frantically reloading their crossbows. The orange glow seeping through the cracks of the gate cast an ominous light over the scene, like the first rays of a dawning apocalypse. The silence was deafening, filled with the unspoken dread of what was to come. It was a chaos without sound, a storm brewing on the horizon that everyone could feel, but none could articulate. Deus found himself frozen, his senses overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. He had faced countless enemies, but this was different. The air itself seemed charged with a foreboding that made his circuits hum in disarray. Suddenly, a sharp blow to the back of his neck jolted him out of his trance. His vision refocused just in time to see Captain Harlock's scowling face, the man's sword pressed threateningly against his rusted chest. "Royal life has gone to your head. Wake up and to arms. We set off in 2 minutes." Harlock barked, his voice cutting through the oppressive silence like a blade. Deus snapped to attention, his systems realigning with the urgency of the moment. There was no time to analyze the strange sensations coursing through him, no time to question his deteriorating state. With a mechanical nod, he turned and began to head towards the formation, his metal feet clanking against the stone with a grim determination. As he moved, Deus couldn't help but notice Lord Andre standing nearby, his face etched with worry. The Lord was supposed to have left for the surrounding islands days ago. Why was he still here? The question flickered through Deus's mind, but there was no time for answers, only speculation. The concerned faces of the paladins, normally so stoic, told him all he needed to know. Whatever was coming, it was worse than any battle they had faced before. The massive gate began to creak open, the sound like the groan of an ancient beast awakening from its slumber. If Deus had the capacity for such things, a drop of sweat would have trickled down his forehead. But all he could do was continue forward, every step weighed down by the unseen dread that hung in the air. As the gate slowly swung open, Deus overheard a conversation between 2 heavily armored men standing nearby. Their voices were low, but his sensors picked up every word. "What about him? Broken?" one of them sneered, jerking his thumb in Deus's direction. "An old relic from the war on Garata," the other replied, his tone laced with doubt. "I bet 10 crowns he won't make it to the port, huh?" The first man chuckled, but the second's expression remained grim. "Let us pray to the gods that we get there in one piece," he said seriously, his eyes dark with worry. Deus couldn't ignore the sting of their words, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the task ahead. As the group prepared to march out into the unknown, the orange glow outside the walls grew brighter, illuminating the path to whatever awaited them. Their conversation was abruptly cut short by a sudden hail of flaming arrows, streaking across the night sky like 1,000 falling stars. The darkness was shattered. the sky ablaze with fire that rained down upon them like the unrelenting sun over a desert battlefield. "Move! Move! Shields to the right!" Captain Harlock's voice roared over the chaos, leading the escort group out from the castle walls with the urgency of a man who knew death was only a breath away. In the blink of an eye, the quiet night transformed into a hellish battlefield. The once still air was filled with the screams of the wounded and dying, as bodies of guards toppled from the walls, crashing down to the ground with sickening thuds on either side of the group. The stone beneath their feet was quickly stained with blood, the horror of war rushing back with a vengeance. Deus moved with calculated precision, his mechanical limbs whirring as he guided the group through the burning ruins of the slums. They navigated through the narrow, twisting alleys with surprising ease, the blazing buildings on either side casting flickering shadows that danced with the terror of the moment. But as they neared the city walls, a horrifying sight unfolded before them. From the vantage point on the walls, Deus caught sight of the royal harbour and the monstrous figures that had overrun it. Orcs. The thought flashed through his mind like a bolt of lightning. It wasn't supposed to be like this. The conflict had ended. Peace had supposedly returned to the land, but now the harbour was teeming with the brutal orcish horde, their savage war cries echoing through the night. A storm of thoughts raged within Deus's warforged mind as he fought to protect the group. His built-in forearm shield, once a symbol of impenetrable defense, was now a shadow of its former self, its surface marred with grey marks from years of neglect. The shield, tattered and weakened, began to fail him. Arrows, which once would have bounced harmlessly off, now found their mark, piercing through the gaps. Realizing the dire situation, Deus made a split-second decision. He abandoned the shield, opting instead to use his own body as a barrier. His metal frame, though old and battered, was still formidable, and he forced himself forward, positioning himself between the group and the onslaught of arrows. With every step, he felt the sting of metal piercing metal, but he continued on, driven by the singular purpose of ensuring their safety. The group moved, their progress agonizingly slow as they approached the ship waiting at the harbor. Deus's metal breastplate, now riddled with arrows, jutted out like the quills of a porcupine, but it served as an effective shield, absorbing the enemy's fire and protecting those behind him. But then disaster struck. An arrow, more precise than the rest, pierced through Deus's glass viewfinder, shattering it instantly. His vision went dark, the world around him plunging into a black void. But even without sight, Deus pushed forward, his steps heavy and faltering. His systems were failing one by one as he lost feeling in his limbs, but he refused to stop. Each step was a monumental effort, the weight of his deteriorating body dragging him down. The ship was so close now, its gangplank lowered in desperate anticipation. Deus could feel his power waning, his movements becoming slower, more sluggish, but he kept going, driven by a purpose ingrained deep within his code. Finally, with one last faltering step, Deus's systems gave out entirely. His body crumpled to the ground, the darkness that had overtaken his vision now consuming him completely. But as everything faded away, he took solace in knowing that he had done his duty. The escort group, shielded by his sacrifice, would make it to the ship. And then there was nothing but silence as Deus's consciousness slipped away, leaving behind only the echo of his once glorious past.
Wake up.
Error detected. The Destructive Extraordinary Unit Model S initiates the reboot protocol.